Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm excited to have Michelle Bennetts here with us today. Michelle is a highly experienced and sought-after facilitator, speaker, management development coach, and Enneagram specialist. With 20 years in training and facilitation, she has trained over 1,500 professionals globally in the Enneagram. And on a personal note, I'm very grateful to be one of those professionals because Michelle was my instructor during a pretty comprehensive Enneagram training, which was excellent. Michelle facilitates various workshops on behalf of top training companies worldwide and is a faculty member for Integrative Enneagram Solutions, Planet Emotions, Grow Consulting, and Inner Life Skills Coaching International. She coaches teams, leaders, and executives to lead self, lead others, and ultimately lead the business to success. In addition, Michelle is a published author and appears regularly on TV and as a podcast guest. And Michelle, it is such a treat to have you on our podcast because you really have such a deep understanding about how our mindsets shape our life, how our inner world of course, shapes our outer world. And so it is with such deep joy that I welcome you to the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here and a real privilege to spend this time and to see your face again. It always gives my heart great joy to see faces of participants and names I'm never quite good at, but faces I never forget. Reconnecting with you has just been a total joy.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I suggested when we did this that perhaps we'll focus our conversation on what's called kind of the three centers of intelligence, expression, and so on, because I think it's such a core concept for people to understand, whether or not they take the Enneagram assessment. It's a universal concept that can really help them to understand and apply in their life. So would you be willing to start us off with just kind of a general understanding of what do we mean by these three centers?
It's such a great question. And to your point, when we talk, we look at the centers in three different ways. So by the three centers, we mean we all have a thinking center. We all have a feeling center. We all have an action center. So we have access to all these three centers, right? Yet we tend to lead with one of them most. We express more of one of them more than the other two. And all three are actually very complementary to one another. I'm sure all of your listeners have had that experience where you've thought, oh, that really makes sense on paper. I've done all the do's and don'ts, and this really makes sense, but your heart is just going, oh, but I really want the other one. Or your heart is going, let's just do this again. And your gut instinct's going, this isn't a good idea. So there's the part of intelligence of actually really connecting with our three centers and understanding that there is intelligence in all three. So that's the intelligence part. It's how do we grow a clear mind that is noticing, as you said at the beginning of our chat today, what is the story I'm telling myself? Because the story I tell myself affects the way I feel, it affects the way I behave, and it affects the outcome. So having a clear mind that is aware of the stories we're telling ourselves on a daily basis is so important. To have an intelligent heart that is open and trusting, it takes huge courage, but this is how we build our intelligent heart level. I know there's also lots of neuroscience around the neurons of the heart being over 20,000 neurons in the heart. And yes, there are millions and millions of neurons in the brain, but our hearts do also have intelligence, and sometimes we need to check in with our feelings and our emotions, which we also often tend to avoid. And our emotions and our feelings are like those unopened emails that we look at the heading and we go like, oh, no, I don't want to open that one. I'll leave that one till later, right? But you eventually end up with these huge unopened emails that when you do open them, it's just overwhelming. So having an intelligent heart is to connect with our emotions as part of who we are and to listen to our hearts. And then, of course, we've got our action or our gut center, where we tune into our gut instincts, but we also know what is the grounded action that needs to be taken when it needs to be taken, even when that action might mean I might feel in conflict to another, or I might feel unpopular, or it feels very difficult, or it's that diet I'm going to start on Monday, that the eternal Mondays. It's what is the right action to take. So on that part, that is the centers of intelligence. We all want to grow. How do we grow? Intelligent thought thinking center, intelligent heart center, and intelligent body center. So that's one of the aspects that we look at the centers, which is the centers of intelligence. The other way that we look at the centers is the centers of expression. So of these three centers, which do we express the most? Would people say that you're more of a thinking person before you take feeling and action? Or do you kind of feel the room and consider everybody else and kind of take action on that before thinking? Or do you tend to just leap into action and then kind of get a sense of how everybody's feeling and then think through and strategize from there? And that's what we talk about center of expression. So all of the three, which of those three do you think you lead with? So it does not mean that you do not have the others. You have all three of these centers, right? But which one are you leading with? And in our conversations in coaching, it's all around how is that serving you and when is it not? So I'm curious to hear from you. Which of the centers of expression do you lead with?
Head.
Do you lead with thinking, feeling, or action?
Yeah, definitely thinking.
Definitely thinking.
Yeah.
And so how does that work for you, like on a positive sense, when the thinking is leading, what tends to follow after? Is it thinking, action, feeling, or thinking, feeling, action?
So I've now, for the past few years, conditioned myself, trained myself to check in with my emotions. So I will say, what am I feeling right now? You know, if I need to self-regulate, so I make a more objective decision, and then I get into action. But for many years, I was not very conscious of those unopened emails, as you called them. And I didn't even think that I had them. But I noticed there were times, maybe with the kids or in other areas, where I would overreact to things, and I'm like, oh, there's some baggage there, right? There's some unopened stuff there. So I have learned to manage that, to work with that. Yeah.
And true to what you say is that any work that we do in this line, it's intentional work. It doesn't happen by itself. So what very often happens when we have high thinking and then next action, it's almost like a washing machine. We like think, act, think, act, think, act, and the heart gets completely overlooked. And to your point, it's like it just gets parked here to the side, and then one thing happens and it all just comes gushing out. And we're like, what is going on with all of this feeling stuff? Like, where did it all come from? So what I want to say to anybody listening out there is that no combination is wrong. It's all about being aware of when it is serving you and when it is not, because all three of these centers are complementary. Good to have them balanced, to really be able to sit and go, I've thought enough, I have felt enough, I've considered enough, and I know what action to take. But there will be certain cases in your life where the world just says, sorry, Jane, there's no time to think about what you need to think about. We made a call, we need to make a call right now. And then you need to courageously step into that action center. But ultimately, what we want to appreciate is that these three centers in alignment, we want them all, they are of all equal value. You know, I've worked with teams who are highly in the action center, in their centers of expression, or CEOs or individuals that are high in action. And you often find people in top leadership zones that have got a very high level of action because that's the expectation. And the great side is that the company is moving and things are happening. And, you know, we're ticking the boxes and we are making the sales. But the team itself is breaking apart because they don't feel like they're included. And we were making mistakes and having to build the plane on the way. And we were realizing, oh, we made that decision so quickly. We didn't think how it was going to affect this system or this department. Then I've met companies who are so feeling and so considerate of everybody else, and they just want everybody to be okay. And they want it to be so inclusive that they struggle to make decisions. And so they actually create conflict by, avoiding it. Because at some point you're going to get a point where somebody's decision or thought is going to be considered. And so that can prevent us then from taking action that we need to take, because we're too busy taking care of everybody else and making sure this is not about inclusion, by the way. Inclusion I absolutely believe in. But when we get locked in that, where it's all about the heart center, then that can prevent us from thinking strategically and taking action. And then, of course, the people that I work with that are high thinking in expression can get into analysis paralysis. And I can disconnect my heart from the world, because everything below the head is just to carry the head around, and all those precious is up here, and I'm thinking and I'm processing, I'm strategizing, but nobody can hear my strategy. Nobody's connecting with my thoughts. And how deep can you go until you know that it's going to work? And so the thinking can go deeper and deeper and wider until we don't actually get to go anywhere. So it's almost as if we were to work with these 3 muscle groups and really appreciate the gift that each one of these centers has to have. We would be accessing the top parts of all of the intelligence that we have. Because yes, we've been taught the intelligence is here, but there's also a lot of nonsense up there, right? There's a lot of limiting beliefs. There's a lot of fears. Our amygdala tells it gets in the way of all kinds of things. And we have lots of thoughts and stories that have got in the way of what our real truth is. And so to be able to access our heart intelligence and our center intelligence and really pay attention to them and find that equilibrium. Some of the Enneagram teachers that I've learned in the world have said, probably working with your centers, not even your types, is the most beautiful but most difficult work you'll ever do.
Yeah, thank you for describing that so well. And I love that you kind of articulated for us that there isn't one better than the other. The idea here is to create alignment, integration between all 3, to check in with all 3, and to operate out of that, so that we're not stuck, as you said, in analysis paralysis. We're not hiding or rejecting or suppressing our emotions, and that we're not acting too quickly, and potentially creating some negative consequences down the line. So how can people learn, even in this conversation, or get a hunch as to what center they mostly operate out of?
Well, because the center of expression is the center that they express most to the world, it would probably be very useful for them to have a thought about it themselves, but then actually ask the people that are around them within their teams or family, out of these 3 things, which one do you see coming out of me most? And which do you see the least? Without taking it as a negative or a positive, just out of curiosity, do you see me more as a thinking person, feeling person, or an action person? And then kind of reflect back on that and go, what does that mean in terms of my human interactions? I often see people with high action centers. They have a lot more human doing conversation and less human being conversations. And to the point that you mentioned just now, having those check-ins of how are you thinking, how are you feeling, and what's happening in your world right now? And making sure that those conversations, they may not happen at every single conversation that we have, but to make sure that we are having those questions included and to be interested in the answer, right? Because I always have a giggle with my class when you say to somebody, hi, how are you feeling? And the person goes, oh, I had such a terrible weekend. And you think, oh my gosh, couldn't you have just said I'm fine, like a normal person, and just left me alone? But to actually be open-hearted and curious and go, I'm seeing you're in struggle. Tell me about it. talk to me. Let's go grab a cup of coffee. I can see that your head's busy right now. You're thinking your mind has gone to the next space. How can I support you in being in this present moment and being a human being in this moment, not in the next moment that doesn't even exist yet. Mm-hmm. Your next moment is only going to exist based on the one we're having right now. So to really get into more human being conversations with self and others, rather than what am I going to do today? What do I need to do next? What's actually happening next? And another beautiful exercise that I have found just so profound in many of my workshops is to actually sit down with a journal or a piece of paper and write down a love letter from your body to yourself. Because if we had to really listen to what our heads and hearts and bodies have been trying to do for us our whole lives in order to make us successful or happy, and how have we really treated them? We don't give them enough sleep. We don't give them the right food. We don't pay attention to that emotional message that's occurring. We suppress, we push, we ignore. And this head, heart, and gut of ours is waking up, and even while we're sleeping, doing its best it can to ensure that we have the best quality of life. So let your body, heart, your head, heart, and your gut write a love letter to you. And then if you're brave enough, write one back.
Wow. That's a profound exercise. I found myself even getting kind of emotional when you were kind of, asking, how are we treating our bodies? How are we treating our hearts? And it's, and my immediate response was not always, in the highest and best way. And so, I think that the idea of just pausing for a moment to notice, during reflective moments, generally, how am I being? How do I want to be? How do I want to express? And also like in the moment. But here's where the kicker is. So in the moment, when there's a lot of stress and we do need to get into action right away, or we need to respond in some way, it might be challenging to pause and, kind of notice what's actually happening. So what advice do you have for people, like as they're going about their life, someone says something, they've been triggered, how can they utilize what you're learning, teaching us today?
Well, that's a real tough one, because it takes a lot of practice, years and years of practice, and I still haven't got it right, is to work on that part of self-regulation that you were talking about, where you can be so aware in the moment that you're about to react and not respond. And it's that stimulus moment, that Viktor Frankl statement, right? There is that little tiny moment between stimulus and response. And we need to work to become so aware that I can feel that my reaction is coming, but is that going to serve me in the best possible way? And that stimulus can just be let me take a breath and see what my head and heart and gut's telling me right now. Because if it's not feeling aligned, it isn't in alignment. And I think that's something that we have maybe disconnected from. When your body is feeling tight and you're feeling tense, go and pay attention to the story that's happening up here, because there's something very disempowering or something that you're not believing to be true occurring, and your body is actually trying to give you that message. I also feel, especially since the pandemic, there's a habit that has been almost handed over into this new world, because we're not back to normal. This is a whole new world. And forgive me if any of your listeners are not really more from the business sense, but during the pandemic, it was like you're on a Teams meeting at 11, and then at 12, and then at 1, and then at 2, and you didn't even know why. You had no time to think about what you were going to talk about. You weren't even a decision maker in the meeting, but you just had to be in the meeting. And so we need to go, why are we having all of these doing conversations when there's no thinking, connection, or implementation happening? We're just different voices, just batting it out, and being online for the sake of being online. So, I love the idea that you mentioned of, even if you've got even if you're under a great deal of pressure, making sure that you're checking in with the other person, so that you are self-aware, you are grounded, and you are established enough to have an active conversation. If you're just jumping in and going, you're not in the right place to go as deep as you want to go and as deep as you need to go.
And so what about if our different centers are giving us different conflicting messages? So as you said, head is saying one thing, let's say when it comes to a decision or a response, right? And then heart is saying do this, and then gut says do that. How do we know what's the highest and best decision or path for us when there is that very intense inner conflict going on?
Lovely question. I think, first of all, that I would say that I would never be able to have a blanket answer for that, because it would have to be contextual. You'd have to be looking at the situation and going, what is needed right now? Which is the muscle I need to use? Is it the heart that's needed? Because let's say we're having a conversation and you're in great distress. My head might be going, I've got all the answers. I'm just going to give you what you need to do, ABC, and we're going to sort this out, right? Or my thinking might go, let me just give her space. I'll think about it. I'll come back. And my heart might be going, just give her the time. What does she need right now? Just open up your generous heart and get rid of the advice. Don't think this through. Just sit, be present. And this for me brings in the word of intuition, which when I first heard it, and you know me quite well by now, anything that sounds woo-woo to me, I'm like, oh, I don't do woo-woo. But a great teacher of mine, Colleen Joy Page, she broke it down into 2 words: intuition. When we're going inwards for our tuition, that's when we start listening to our own truth. And now, instead of the world demanding what of us needs to be taken from first, we take a pause and we go inwards and we go, what is needed most in this situation? Does my child need me to coach him through his homework? Does he need me to give him space? Or does he need me to just give him a hug, let him know that he's loved, and that we'll come back to this later because he's stressed and we're not going to get anywhere with this right now? So really getting in touch with that intuition, I think, is key to deciphering which of the 3 centers is going to be the most useful in that situation.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And the more resilient that we are, the more of that self-work that you spoke about that we do, to have that space between stimulus and response, that tiny little choice point, the more likely that we are to pause and notice what our intuition is speaking to us. And the other idea that came up is maybe like confirming that. So if, let's say, with a child or with a team member or spouse, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
And have them tell us what center, if they need us to be in. Do they need us to take some action? Do they need us to just be present, to help them resolve the situations, to acknowledge their emotions? What do they need? And that's kind of a cool conversation, I suppose, to have even in advance of those situations, right? It's almost like the love language kind of conversation. What do you need? What is the best way that I can support you? So that in those, moments of distress, it's just, easier to go there, and we're much more likely to give somebody what they actually need.
True. And that's the power of coaching, right? The right question at the right time can change the course of a person's life. And something that you said to me now that also made me think in terms of us growing our centers is reflect upon which of those 3 centers you're the most uncomfortable with, because that's where your most work is. That's where your most work is. So, I mean, I'm very high action. I'm also high action, then thinking, then feeling, and feeling to a point where I ignore when I'm feeling hungry. I ignore when I'm feeling tired. I ignore when I'm feeling sad. I ignore when I'm feeling. So that lowest is the one. It's like building 3 muscles. Like find the one that it's the most difficult for you. As you work on that for yourself, you're able to give that as a gift to others as well.
So what do we do? What are some tips that you may have for us? So let's say someone listening is like, Michelle, I'm just like you, right? I go through the day, I'm overwhelmed. I often find that I don't even eat lunch, or, I really don't pay attention to what's going on the inside. What can he or she do? And then maybe we can kind of give some guidance for the other centers that we're not as well versed in.
Okay. So a couple of things that come to mind for a dominant action expression center is before you open up your laptop and start actioning everybody else's emails, to actually start with writing down what you would like to get done in one day from an action perspective view. Still from an action perspective view, I would say, what human being connections are you going to have today so that you're not just stepping into action? Having some connection, having some more feeling conversations, having some human being versus just human doing conversations. Like I said, I think the love letter to your body is all good for 3 types. For the high feeling, to also recognize that sometimes not being at the risk of being unpopular or at the risk of holding other people's feelings, you may not actually be connecting truthfully to your own. So your feelings are repressed. It's all about feeling everybody else, and that can end up with complete and total burnout as well. So on the action side, you can end up with burnout. On the feeling side, you can end up with burnout. On the thinking side, to realize that if you're willing to think about what is enough to take the next step, because the world is ever changing. And if we're trying to think through a whole project and all of a sudden, oh no, the company's just been bought over. Now we've got a whole new strategy. We've just spent the last 6 months working on a strategy. So what do I need to think about to take the next few steps, and then think to take the next steps so that I can participate with my heart and my head and be present with people during the course of this. And my last tip to the thinking styles would also be realize that when you pull back from others to think, you're actually disconnecting from resources of information. So by connecting with others, you're actually accessing more wisdom and knowledge than you are by pulling away.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder personally, because that spoke to me, because I oftentimes, that type of individual that is in that analysis paralysis and be like, okay, I need some space, I need a little bit of time, right? So a little bit of that disconnection to be able to process and feel comfortable so I can get into action. And it's true that there is such a gift that comes from that connection with other people, whether it's direct or synchronistically, right? A connection that's being made, or some little hint of something that could, accelerate my path in some way. So it goes against kind of the natural instinct of, in my case, kind of sometimes taking a step back, but rather to say, notice that when it's happening, we say, is that the best approach right now? And what would it take for me to stay in this?
Yeah.
Right.
And also, the high thinking, to also realize that their ability to observe and absorb information in ways that other people's can't, when they connect and share that information, that actually enlightens other people. So they'd rather be thinking than speaking, and thinking than sharing, and thinking and connecting. But all of that beautiful observation, wisdom, and thought, if shared, it's a beautiful gift that they give the world. So again, we can see these 3 just intermeshing, and when we balance them within ourselves and we balance them within our organizations, our families, our connections, our relationships, it's one of the most beautiful work we'll ever do. But it takes intention. It doesn't happen by itself.
And, there was something that you said a few minutes ago as well around people who are in that, emotional center. Yes, that more dominant and really caring for other people and not giving enough attention to what's going on inside of them. Last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, for Nurses Week, I did a training for a group of nurses. And that was something that, we talked about in the training around kind of this concept of overcare, right? Caring so much about others, right? Or even about ideas that it actually hurts us, right? Where we begin to worry and really carry that. And that can deplete our battery very, very quickly.
Yeah. And that's so true. When we're unable to balance our feeling center, people are getting what's left of us, not the abundance of our support. Because we're not replenishing. We're just giving, because there's this essence around selfishness that we've been taught is wrong. And part of selfish is self-care. It's my own purpose. It's my own sleep. It's my own rest. It's not staying awake till 12 o'clock because my boss needs this report at 5. Trust me, they won't die. Go to sleep, right? So that selfishness that we want to reject, that is self-love, it's self-care, and no one is going to look after us better than we are going to ourselves. And so looking after ourselves is looking after each other.
Yeah. And it really, tremendous reminder for all of us in this busy world where we, sometimes feel like we're pulled in many directions or people need so much from us. So what do you think is most critical here for people listening when it comes to this concept of these 3 centers that could really support them in living, and I would say designing and living their highest, best life? What's most important here?
Such a great question. I think step 1 is self-reflection. The self-reflection is to put down thinking, feeling, and action and really getting a sense of which of those 3 muscles do you use the most and the least, and what do you gain from it, and what does it cost you? That would be my first, is self-reflection. If you're unclear, ask the people around you, how do you think I express more thoughtful, more kind of heartfelt, more action-oriented? And how do you think that affects our relationship? And then reflecting on how I can bring those 3 into balance on a more conscious basis, with all of the tips that we've mentioned throughout the conversations. Find the one that you're the most uncomfortable with. That is your life lesson. That's one that's scratching on you and going, sorry, I know that this is uncomfortable, but you have to grow on me. So from all the tips that I've shared so far, and you've mentioned it as well, it's the more aware we become. For me, the question is in that moment, is this going to serve me or not? Because sometimes I just want to take action and just go, let me just take action and be finished and go. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, I'm in grief. Or all of a sudden I'll share a little story with you, just how to break down how crucial the centers are. And I think I may have actually shared this with you during our training because it was very recent. And so I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I was doing the training during the day, leadership training during the day, until around 5 o'clock in the evening. Would get home 6 o'clock, log in 6:30, and then I would do Enneagram training from 6:30 until 11 at night. And I did this for three months about. And I was like, obviously I can do that, like completely, totally fine. And then one day I was standing in the middle of a training and I was feeling tired, but I was fine. In a minute, it would like somebody had switched the lights off. I was on my back. There was an ambulance parked outside. I had all of my beautiful delegates like running around, making sure that I was fine. And I was in intensive care for 4 days. I'd had a 4-minute complete epileptic fit. And it was all from total burnout. I was in action zone. I was ignoring my feelings completely. My thinking zone was going, there's only so many hours in a day. And I was just completely suppressing them and just running on action, thinking, I can handle this. No, your action, your body, and your thinking are all trying to take care of you. And you need to listen to all 3.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that again. I remember that. And I'm curious, which center do you kind of resonate the most with or kind of operate out of?
I definitely operate most out of, I've kind of shifted. It was definitely since those events. But I'm consciously tapping more into my feeling now than I used to before. So instead of jumping into action, I'm going, how am I actually feeling? And I'm also thinking like, what does my schedule actually look like? When have I actually got quality time for this? So as opposed to saying, yes, let's do that. Yes, I'm like, okay, hold on. When have I got this? When have I got that? And and if any of your readers are or listeners are aware of the Enneagram type 3, which is the competitive achiever, we'll just go, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Instead of asking a question, yes, you could, but should you? I mean, really, is it really all that? Is that something that you want to do? Is it something that you're passionate about? Or is it just something that you just want to do? So I've been definitely stepping more into my thinking and my feeling and taking action when action is related to passion.
Yeah. Wow. And I appreciate that, because I think that, that question of what is that passion, or what is that's most important to me, right? My values in this area of life, and aligning our decisions with those values, right? And asking those questions, like, for what purpose, right? If I were going to, let's say, as you said, kind of a high doing center, for what purpose? Yes.
Yeah.
And what's,
why?
Yeah.
What is your why?
Yeah.
And we tend to do a lot of things in life without a strong reason why.
Again, a really important reminder for everybody listening. Yes, especially, those of us that are very curious and want to jump into things, right? Another squirrel. And it's like, and then, we find ourselves being depleted, or again, overreacting or making bad decisions. And, to just realize that our body needs more, right? It needs us to be able to pause and tune in to these other centers to rebalance ourselves, because it is not sustainable. As fun as it may be for the time that it is, it's certainly not sustainable. And at the end of the day, there is that need for an inner harmony, right? Our body will, as it did for you, right, will do what it needs to do to make us wake up to the fact that we must rebalance, whether we like it or not. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, anything else? I mean, it's been such a lovely conversation, but I feel like we've covered so much.
I believe so too. And I would love for people to know, Michelle, how they can get in touch with you, how they can take the Enneagram assessment or other things that you do, because I know certainly it was profound for me to learn about myself, and also to be able to utilize that in coaching and in life with other people. So how can people kind of access all of that?
Absolutely. So my email address is Michelle@skillset, MICHELLE, Michelle at skillset, skillset.co.za. You'll also find me on LinkedIn under Michelle Bennetts, Bennetts, and you'll also find out more about me and what I do on my website, which is skillsetcoach.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again, Michelle. This was just such a delightful, delicious conversation that I think is really important for everyone to listen to. And like I said, I invite people, if they're curious to learn even more about themselves, to take some assessments. And the Enneagram is certainly a tremendously valuable assessment to take. So thank you once again for your generosity with your time.
Absolutely. And it's so lovely to see you again. And thank you for the difference that you're making in this beautiful world. People think about doing these things, but they play it off, and you're making it happen, and you're changing lives. So my love to you, and thank you for making me a part of it.
Thank you, Michelle. My love back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers, everybody who's listening. Have an amazing day or evening.